Well, hello there. Today, for discrete math, we're going to be looking at pulling all of our different apportionments together. We're going to be talking about different ideal properties of apportionment. So I'm out here on this beautiful day enjoying my quarantine at home, making the most of it, trying to get some fresh air. Hope you do too as well. So today we're going to be talking about ideal apportionment. We've got our 5 different methods so far. I don't know why it keeps doing that. We've got our 5 different methods so far. We've got Hamilton's method, where we take the natural quota, round everything down, figure out how many seats we still need to allocate, and look at the largest decimal parts. We've got the Lowndes method of apportionment, where we round all the natural quotas down, we find the largest relative fractional parts. That was the decimal divided by the integer. Those were our 2 quota methods, where we take the natural quota and we round up or down based on the quota and the decimal portion. We've got our 3 divisor methods. We have Jefferson's method. Jefferson always rounds down. Then we find a new divisor until everything rounds down correctly. We've got the Webster method, which rounds at 0.5. We find a new divisor, and then we go through and find the modified quotas and round at 0.5, and we keep doing that until everything works out correctly. And most recently, we have the Hill-Huntington method, where we find the new divisor and we round according to the geometric mean, which is where setting things up in the spreadsheet helps us out so much. So we're going to go over and look at some different properties that we have, looking at different historical applications where our apportionment has taken place in the United States and why we use what we use today. So these are going to be our ideal properties of apportionment. Now, over the years, different methods were used throughout the United States, and I gave you that website as a reference to kind of see how things changed over time, both the numbers as well as the methods that were used. Initially, 1789, Alexander Hamilton proposed his method. Didn't get accepted because kind of Jefferson and Washington had their own idea. So we started off, we used Jefferson's method from 1791 all the way through 1842. We then adopted Webster's method, proposed by the New Hampshire, I almost said North Hampshire, I do that every year, New Hampshire Congressman Daniel Webster. Things started to get a little bit mixed up. The size of the country was increasing. We used a combination of Hamilton and Webster's method. Numbers were chosen for the House of Representatives, the size of the House, such that both of those always agreed. After that, 1872, that led into the election of Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden. They kind of just said, here, we're going to make it work. We'll do whatever we want to do. They made up some numbers. Kind of Hamilton's method, kind of switched it up. But 10 years later, we have a problem. The country is increasing in size. All of a sudden, what we have is called the Alabama paradox. We're going to come more to that later. Then we kept on screwing things up. It seems to be the American way. Something doesn't work right, let's keep doing it. 1901 again, we had this house size paradox, Alabama paradox, where we're going to see that in a little bit. The state sizes, house size keeps getting screwed up. States eventually lose seats that they were due otherwise. We did it again in 1907. We sure don't learn from mistakes. Started to switch into Webster's method for 10 years prior to World War II, just because it was easy, people understood it. At this time, a method was proposed by a Princeton statistician and the chief of the Census Bureau in Washington. That gave us our Hill-Huntington method. So in 1941, they set there are going to be 435 seats. We don't care how many new states there are. We don't care how big the population is. We have 435 seats. We're using this method. That's it. Don't change it anymore. Now, over the years, there's been a number of suits that have come before the Supreme Court saying that it's unconstitutional, that there are questions about the methods. Talk about gerrymandering today and how that works. It's a big topic in politics. Now, continuing on, the reason we choose a specific method is largely political. 1789, 1790, 1791, Hamilton's method was thrown away because in favor of Jefferson's method, one seat was taken away from New York, one seat was taken away from Pennsylvania, and both of those seats went to Virginia. It seems a little bit unfair that Virginia got an extra 2 instead of distributing things fairly. That's the very first problem that we run into. We call this the quota property of apportionment. No state gains or loses more seats than a natural quota rounded up or down. What happened with Jefferson's method is it took 2 seats and took both of them for Virginia. So they had their natural quota rounded up, and then they rounded up again. We've seen this a few times, just haven't pointed it out. But the idea is that somebody gets more than their fair share. So as an example, say a state's natural quota is 5.3. If we're rounding, you either get 5 or you get 6. They should not end up with 4 or 7. If they ended up with 4 or 7, that would be a violation of the quota property. You end up with more than your fair share. Hamilton and Lowndes, those are our two quota methods. They satisfy the quota property because we're either taking the natural quota and rounding up or rounding down. You don't get anything more. The other side, Jefferson, Webster, Hill, Huntington, they all potentially violate the quota property. When we change that divisor, some states go up more than the others, and so we do have this possibility to violate the quota property. Now, in the history of the apportionments, 1880, we have what's called the Alabama paradox. The country is expanding, new states are being added. The government said, let's increase our house size. So what happened was the house size was changing. We wanted to add more seats. All of a sudden, running the numbers, Alabama ended up with less. There's more stuff to give out, but you get less as a result. How is that right? Now, the idea of a paradox is something that's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense. We're thinking more states, more people, more seats, everybody wins. Instead, Alabama ended up losing representation. This gives us what's called the house size property. For a fixed population, if we increase the house size, if we add seats, no state should end up with less. And this happened in Alabama. It's happened throughout our history. It's one of those things that we just deal with. More seats are available, nobody should end up with less, is the base idea behind this. Our 3 divisor methods, Jefferson, Webster, and Hill-Huntington, always satisfy the house size property. There's one ratio, one divisor. We pick that new divisor and everything is divided the same. They have consistent rounding rules all the way through. On the other side, Hamilton and Lowndes, our 2 quota methods, they do potentially violate the house size property. What happens is because we take that natural quota and some quotas we round up, some quotas we round down, those decimal portions do not change at the same rate between states. And this is what happened for Alabama. You can look at the exact numbers. I'm sure you can find them online. What happened was with the new states that were added, the Hamilton method that was being used at the time caused one state just to go above the rounding point, and Alabama was just a little bit lower when we increased the number of seats, excuse me. So Hamilton and Lowndes can potentially violate the house size property. Our third and final apportionment property we're going to look at is called the population property. For a fixed house size, if my population increases, I should not lose a seat to a state whose population decreases. So this is looking at when people are moving around. This showed up in the country with the westward migration in the late 1800s. People were moving west, new states were being added. Certain states were losing population because they were moving towards California, towards the west. Happened that states would have their population increased, but at different rates to those that were decreasing. The problem that showed up was that states, their population was increasing, they ended up with less representation. The idea behind this is, my population goes up, I should receive more seats, more representation. Your population goes down, you should receive less representation. It does not always happen that way. Just like the last one, our 3 divisor methods, Jefferson, Webster, and Hill-Huntington, always satisfy the population property. We have one divisor that applies to all and a consistent rounding method that applies to all quotas. Conversely, Hamilton and Lowndes, because sometimes we have different ratios, sometimes we round up, sometimes we round down, Hamilton and Lowndes, through adjusting the quotas, may violate the population property. Putting this all together, there actually is no way to say this is the best apportionment method that we should be using. Something always violates one of those three properties. Different organizations, it's all about distributing, apportioning, sharing proportional your goods, seats, or any other resources along the way. This is the base idea behind economics. How do you allocate resources? How do you apportion resources fairly amongst different groups? And if we look at those three above properties, we saw that the quota property, both of our quota methods satisfied that, but our three divisor methods of saying do not satisfy that. But the other two properties, it's the opposite way around. Nothing will actually hit all three of those properties together. There is no best way to allocate those resources fairly. So either the quota property is violated or the other two can be violated. It's up to you. Which one matters more? Do you get your fair share, or does somebody end up with less despite having more? It's kind of a paradox. So we're going to take a look at a few examples, try it out, show where we have violations to these different properties in the assignment that we have. Good luck. Let me know how it goes.